You know what's funny about betrayal? It doesn't come with a warning. There's no alarm that goes off when the person who's supposed to love you most decides to destroy everything you've ever cared about. My name is Sarah, and 6 months ago, I thought I knew what pain was. I was wrong. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for watching your own father try to steal your dying mother's legacy while she's barely cold in the ground. I'm sitting here now, my hands still shaking from what happened in that courtroom today, and I keep thinking about those two words. Two simple words that changed everything. Operation Blue Harbor. Just saying them out loud still makes my chest tight with rage and grief and something that might be justice, if justice can feel this raw and devastating. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand just how deep this betrayal goes. You need to understand why those two words had the power to bring down a man I used to call Dad. My mother died 3 months ago. Ovarian cancer. Brutal, unforgiving, and fast. In her final weeks, when the morphine made her words slur, but her mind was still sharp as a blade, she kept telling me to watch out for your father. At the time, I thought it was the medication talking. Dad had always been difficult, controlling, demanding, quick to anger, but he'd been married to Mom for 35 years. They'd built a life together, a business empire together. Surely grief was making her paranoid. God, how naive I was. The reading of the will should have been straightforward. Mom had been meticulous about everything in life. So, of course, she'd been meticulous about death, too. She'd left detailed instructions, had everything organized, every asset accounted for. The family construction company, Foster and Associates, was to be split between Dad and me, 60-40. The house would go to me, since Dad already had his own place after their separation 2 years earlier. The remainder of her assets, including her substantial personal savings and investment portfolio, would fund a scholarship program for underprivileged kids pursuing trade skills. Simple, clean, fair. Everything Mom did was fair. But you know what my father did? He contested it. Every single line. Claimed Mom wasn't of sound mind when she'd updated the will just 6 months before her death. Claimed I'd manipulated a dying woman. Claimed undue influence. The man who'd barely visited her in the hospital, who'd missed half her chemo appointments, who'd spent more time with his secretary than his wife. That man stood up in court and accused me of being the manipulator. The rage I felt that day nearly knocked me over. Picture this. I'm 28 years old. I've just lost the only parent who ever really loved me, and I'm sitting in a mahogany-paneled courtroom listening to my own father's lawyer argue that I'm some kind of scheming gold digger who poisoned my dying mother's mind against her devoted husband. The lies came so easily to him. 35 years of marriage reduced to a series of calculated legal maneuvers designed to paint my mother as a confused, easily manipulated invalid. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone in that room exactly what kind of man Richard Foster really was. How he'd had at least 3 affairs during their marriage that I knew of. How he'd slowly isolated Mom from her friends over the years, always with some reasonable excuse. How he'd controlled every dollar that came into their joint accounts while hiding his own assets in places she could never find them. How he'd made her feel small and worthless and grateful for whatever scraps of attention he threw her way. But my lawyer, Clara Martinez, put her hand on my arm and whispered, "Let him hang himself. Men like this always do." Clara was everything my father wasn't. Honest, straightforward, fierce in her loyalty to her clients. She'd handled Mom's estate planning and had seen firsthand how sharp and decisive Mom had been right up until the end. She knew the will contest was garbage, but she also knew something I was about to learn. Fighting dirty men requires patience and strategy, not just righteous anger. The first few hearings were torture. Dad's team had clearly done their homework. They brought in witnesses who testified about Mom's declining mental state. Her former cleaning lady, who claimed Mom had seemed confused about finances. A neighbor who said she'd appeared frail and easily led in her final months. Even Mom's oncologist, who admitted under oath that the medications could potentially affect decision making, though he stopped short of saying they had in Mom's case. Each testimony felt like another shovel of dirt being thrown on Mom's grave. They were systematically destroying her reputation, her memory, her final wishes. And my father sat there through all of it, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the grieving widower who just wanted to honor his late wife's true intentions. I'll never forget the day his secretary, Jennifer, took the stand. 23 years old, blonde, the kind of woman who crosses her legs, just so when she sits down and somehow makes it look accidental. She'd worked for Dad for 2 years. Coincidentally, right around the time my parents separated. She testified that Mom had called the office several times in her final months, sounding disoriented and angry without cause. She accused Mr. Foster of things that simply weren't true, Jennifer said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She seemed to think he was hiding money or having an affair. It was very sad to witness her decline. The affair part was rich, considering I'd seen Jennifer leaving Dad's apartment on more than one occasion during Mom's illness. But I couldn't prove it, and Clara warned me that accusations without evidence would only make me look desperate. That night, I went home to Mom's house, my house now if the will stood, and I cried until I had nothing left. I sat in her kitchen, surrounded by her things, her coffee mug still in the sink because I couldn't bring myself to wash it, and I felt so utterly alone. Dad wasn't just trying to steal her money. He was trying to erase her, turn her into this pathetic, confused old woman who couldn't be trusted to make her own decisions. The worst part? I could see it was working. The judge, a stern older man named Henderson, seemed increasingly skeptical of the will with each passing hearing. He kept asking pointed questions about the timing of the updates, about Mom's mental state, about my level of involvement in her decisions. Every question felt like another nail in the coffin of justice, but Clara kept telling me to be patient. He's overplaying his hand, she'd say after each devastating session. Guys like your father always do. They can't help themselves. I didn't understand what she meant until the day Dad decided to take the stand himself. He'd avoided testifying for weeks, letting his lawyers and witnesses do the talking. But I think his ego finally got the better of him. He wanted to be the star of his own show, the grieving husband fighting for his beloved wife's true legacy. God, he was good. I'll give him that. 35 years in business had taught him how to work a room, and a courtroom isn't that different from a boardroom when you think about it. He spoke about their early days together, building the company from nothing, how Mom had always deferred to his judgment on financial matters, how concerned he'd been about her increasing paranoia and confusion in her final months. She started accusing me of things that were completely out of character, he said, his voice breaking in all the right places. Sarah was spending more and more time with her, and I could see how she was changing, how angry she was becoming. It broke my heart to see my wife turn against me like that. He painted himself as the victim, the devoted husband whose dying wife had been turned against him by their manipulative daughter. and I could see some people in that courtroom buying it. The judge was nodding along, making notes, asking sympathetic questions. That's when Clara leaned over and whispered something that changed everything. Ask me about Operation Blue Harbor tonight, but not here, not now. Operation Blue Harbor. The words meant nothing to me, but something in Clara's voice made my blood run cold. I'd hired her to handle Mom's estate, but I was starting to realize there were things about this case, about my father, that I didn't understand yet. That evening, Clara came to my house. She looked tired, older than her 50-something years, and she was carrying a thick folder that she set on Mom's kitchen table like it weighed 100 pounds. Your mother hired me for more than just estate planning, she said without preamble. About a year before she died, she came to me with suspicions about your father's business dealings. She wanted me to investigate. The folder contained everything: bank records, dummy corporation filings, offshore account statements, correspondence with shell companies I'd never heard of. My father hadn't just been having affairs. He'd been systematically looting their joint business, moving assets into hidden accounts, creating fake contracts with non-existent vendors. Operation Blue Harbor was the code name for his largest scam. He'd been billing Foster and Associates for subcontractor work that never happened, materials that were never delivered, equipment that didn't exist. The payments went to a company called Blue Harbor Construction, which existed only on paper and had one bank account, controlled entirely by Richard Foster. He's stolen nearly $2 million over the past 5 years, Clara said, her voice flat with disgust. Your mother figured it out about a year ago. That's why she separated from him. That's why she updated the will to limit his inheritance. She was trying to protect the business and ensure he couldn't steal any more. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking with rage, while Mom was dying, while she was fighting for every breath and enduring chemotherapy that made her violently sick. My father was stealing from their life's work. He was planning his future while she was losing hers. Why didn't she confront him? I asked. She was going to, after she got better. Clara's voice was gentle. She thought she had time. She thought she could gather enough evidence to have him arrested. But the cancer moved faster than anyone expected. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't even cry. I just sat there, surrounded by evidence of my father's crimes, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest where my heart used to be. Can we use this? I asked. Clara smiled for the first time in weeks. Oh, honey, we're going to destroy him. But even knowing what we knew, we had to be careful. Clara explained that bringing criminal charges would take months or years, and there was no guarantee of success. Rich men with good lawyers had a way of making financial crimes disappear, but we could use the threat of criminal charges to end his will contest immediately. The trick, Clara said, is to do it publicly, in front of the judge and everyone in that courtroom. Make it impossible for him to deny or deflect. Make him choose between admitting fraud or perjuring himself under oath. We planned it carefully. Clara would wait until Dad was back on the stand, then introduce the Blue Harbor documents as evidence of his undue influence over the business finances. She'd frame it as proof that Mom had good reason to limit his inheritance, not because she was confused, but because she'd discovered his theft. The morning of the hearing, I could barely eat. I kept thinking about Mom, wondering if she'd approve of what we were about to do. Would she want me to destroy my father publicly? Or would she want me to just quietly settle, avoid the scandal, protect the family name? But then I thought about Jennifer on the witness stand, calling Mom confused and paranoid. I thought about Dad sitting there so smugly, so confident that his lies would win the day. I thought about all those times Mom had apologized for being suspicious, for questioning his explanations about money, for not trusting him completely. He'd made her doubt herself even when she was right. Even when she was dying, he'd made her feel like the problem. Fuck protecting him. Mom deserved justice. Dad took the stand again that morning, still playing the grieving husband. Clara let him talk for a while, let him dig himself deeper into his performance. He spoke about how much he'd loved Mom, how he'd tried to help her through her paranoid episodes in her final months. She kept accusing me of hiding money, he said, shaking his head sadly. No matter how many times I showed her our accounts, explained our finances, she insisted I was keeping secrets from her. It was heartbreaking to watch someone I loved lose touch with reality like that. That's when Clara struck. "Mr. Foster," she said, standing up with a document in her hand, "are you familiar with Blue Harbor Construction?" I watched my father's face, and for just a split second, I saw it. The flicker of panic. The moment he realized his whole world was about to come crashing down. But he recovered quickly. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said carefully. Clara approached the witness stand with a stack of papers. "Blue Harbor Construction, a company that's received over $2 million in payments from Foster and Associates over the past 5 years. You signed the checks yourself." Dad's lawyer was on his feet, objecting, but Judge Henderson wanted to hear this. I could see the curiosity in his eyes, the sense that something important was happening. "Your Honor," Clara continued, "I'd like to submit these documents as evidence that the deceased had very good reason to be suspicious of the defendant's financial dealings. These records show systematic theft from their joint business, hidden through a shell company controlled entirely by Mr. Foster." The courtroom erupted. Dad's lawyer was shouting objections. The judge was calling for order, and reporters in the back were suddenly very interested in what was happening. But all I could see was my father's face as Clara laid out document after document. Bank records showing payments to Blue Harbor, articles of incorporation listing Dad as the sole owner, account statements showing the money being moved to offshore banks. "This is ridiculous," Dad said, but his voice had lost its confident timbre. "Those are routine subcontractor payments. Blue Harbor is a legitimate company." "Then you won't mind providing us with their business address?" Clara asked sweetly. "Their employee records, documentation of the work they performed?" Silence. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Or perhaps you can explain why Blue Harbor Construction has never filed a tax return, why it has no employees, no equipment, no physical location, why every single check from Foster and Associates was deposited directly into an account controlled by you." That's when I knew we had him. My father, the master manipulator who'd been lying to judges and lawyers for months, was finally trapped by his own greed. Judge Henderson was asking pointed questions now. Dad's own lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. The whole careful house of lies was collapsing in real time. But Dad made one last desperate play. He looked directly at me, his eyes full of what might have been genuine desperation, and said, "Sarah, honey, please, tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Your mother was confused about the business finances. She didn't understand." That's when I stood up. I'd been silent through months of hearings, letting the lawyers do the talking, but I couldn't sit there and let him use me as his final escape route. "Your Honor," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet courtroom, "may I approach the witness stand?" Henderson nodded, probably because the whole proceeding had already gone so far off script. that nothing would surprise him anymore. I walked up to where my father was sitting, this man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my wedding. This man who'd been systematically destroying everything my mother had worked for while she was dying in a hospital bed. I leaned in close so only he could hear me, and I whispered two words. Two words that contained everything I knew, everything Clara had discovered, everything Mom had suspected but never been able to prove. Operation Blue Harbor. The change in his face was immediate and total. All the color drained out. His eyes went wide with something that looked like terror. His mouth fell open, and for several long seconds, he didn't breathe. The whole courtroom was watching this silent exchange, watching my father's composure completely shatter at whatever I'd said. Judge Henderson leaned forward, trying to hear. The court reporter looked confused. Dad's lawyer was half standing, unsure whether to object or intervene. But Dad just stared at me like I'd stabbed him, like those two words had reached into his chest and torn out his heart. "How?" he whispered back, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "She knew," I said, still speaking just for him. "Mom figured it out a year ago. She knew about the shell companies, the fake invoices, the offshore accounts. She knew about all of it, Dad. She wasn't confused or paranoid or manipulated by me. She was protecting her life's work from a thief." I stepped back then, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Your Honor, I believe my father would like to withdraw his contest of my mother's will." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Everyone was staring at Dad, waiting for him to respond, to deny what I'd implied, to fight back. Instead, he just sat there, looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen him. The fight had gone out of him completely. Operation Blue Harbor, just those three words, had destroyed him more effectively than any legal argument or piece of evidence. His lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear, trying to salvage the situation, but Dad wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at me with something that might have been regret or shame or just complete defeat. "I," he started, then stopped. His voice was hoarse, broken. "I need to speak with my attorney." Judge Henderson called a recess, and within an hour it was over. Dad's legal team withdrew the will contest. No explanations, no face-saving measures, no negotiated settlement. Just a complete and total capitulation. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt justice finally being served. Instead, I just felt empty, hollow, like I'd won a war that nobody should have had to fight. Clara found me in the hallway afterward, crying in a bathroom stall like a teenager. "You did the right thing," she said when I finally emerged. "Your mother would be proud." "Would she?" I asked. "I just destroyed my father in front of a room full of strangers. I ended his career, probably his freedom when the criminal charges come. What kind of daughter does that make me?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "The kind who refuses to let her mother's memory be destroyed by lies. The kind who believes in justice even when it hurts. The kind your mother raised you to be." That night, I went home to Mom's house and sat in her kitchen again, but this time I finally washed her coffee mug. I put away her reading glasses that had been sitting on the counter for months. I started the long process of letting her go. The criminal investigation into Operation Blue Harbor took 6 months. Dad was eventually charged with embezzlement, tax fraud, and creating false business records. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, plus full restitution to Foster and Associates. The company survived, barely. With Dad gone and the stolen money returned, I was able to keep it afloat. It's smaller now, more focused, but it's honest. Every contract we sign, every invoice we send, every dollar we earn, it's all legitimate. Mom would have approved. I never spoke to my father again after that day in court. He tried to call a few times from prison, left voicemails asking for forgiveness, for understanding, for just 5 minutes to explain himself. I deleted them all without listening to the end. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Some lies are too fundamental to overlook. When someone you're supposed to be able to trust shows you that everything you believed about them was false, when they try to steal not just your inheritance, but your mother's reputation, your family's integrity, your own sense of reality, forgiveness starts to feel less like grace and more like enabling. But I did take Clara's advice about one thing. 6 months after the trial, I established the Elena Foster Integrity Fund. It provides grants to small business owners who've been victims of financial fraud, helps them recover and rebuild. Mom always believed that honest work deserved protection, that people who played by the rules shouldn't be destroyed by those who didn't. The first recipient was a woman whose business partner had embezzled nearly everything she'd worked 20 years to build. When I handed her the check, she cried the same way I'd cried in that courthouse bathroom. Not tears of joy, exactly, but tears of relief. The relief that comes when someone finally believes your story, finally validates your pain, finally says that what happened to you was wrong and you deserve better. That's what those two words, Operation Blue Harbor, represented in the end. Not just the code name for my father's crimes, but proof that my mother's instincts had been right all along. Proof that her suspicions weren't paranoia, her questions weren't confusion, her precautions weren't cruelty. She'd known who he really was, and she'd tried to protect us from him, even from the grave. Justice isn't always about revenge, though revenge certainly played a part in what I did that day. Sometimes justice is simply about refusing to let liars control the narrative. Sometimes it's about standing up and saying, loud enough for everyone to hear, this is what really happened, and you don't get to rewrite history just because the truth is inconvenient. My father spent 3 years in prison and lost everything: his business, his reputation, his freedom, his family. Some people might say that's too harsh a punishment for financial crimes. Some people might say I should have shown mercy, found a way to resolve things privately, protected him from the full consequences of his choices. Those people didn't watch their dying mother apologize for being paranoid about money while her husband was literally stealing from her. They didn't sit through months of court hearings listening to their father's lies about their mother's mental state. They didn't have to choose between justice for the dead and loyalty to the living. I chose justice. I chose truth. I chose to honor the woman who raised me instead of protecting the man who betrayed us both. And if I had to do it all over again, if I found myself back in that courtroom with my father on the witness stand, spinning his web of lies, I'd lean in close and whisper those same two words without hesitation. Operation Blue Harbor, the words that brought my father down and set my mother's memory free.